Okay, yeah, so as always, this call is recorded and will be posted online. And Nick, do you want to drive this one and I will scroll?
Yeah, it sounds good to me. So we have a couple things today. I think we're going to start out with Nicholas, if you don't mind, the presentation from last week around page visibility. And then we had a couple things around TPAC and some preps for that coming in the fall. Obviously, it's going to be a virtual conference this year, but there's some things that we can do to kind of get ourselves ready for that and hopefully have a productive TPAC 2020. Why don't we, Nicholas, if you are ready and willing, start with your presentation on page visibility.
Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to present an update on page visibility. I wrote a document where I documented some of the problems that we've been hearing. One of them was the fact that you don't really get a complete history of page visibility from the browser because you can only register an event listener, and obviously that means that you do not get any changes that occurred before the listener was registered. And the other problem is for paint timing in particular, it seems that you really want to take page visibility into account. Otherwise, paint timing metrics may be pretty inflated, right? If the user opens the page in the background, for example, and you go into it, you'll get really high FCP or any other painting metric. So one problem that was surfaced was the fact that this is not super discoverable from paint timing. So on the doc, it seems there was some pushback to the idea of adding additional API surface to make page visibility more discoverable from paint timing, which I think is mostly fine since most people use performance metrics from analytics providers, or if they don't, then they're already a pretty big company with a dedicated performance team. So that team will probably also know what they're doing. We can certainly make sure that the documentation available is a bit more clear on that subject. For example, augment the spec with a non-normative node, or in the introduction or examples, maybe make sure that page visibility is mentioned there, as well as things like developer documentation like Chromium's web.dev or Mozilla's VDN documentation. Perhaps that should make a mention of page visibility, but the idea is we won't add more API surface to address that. For the other issue, though, we do need an API. And so the proposal is to add a new performance entry. And that way you can just use the performance observer with the buffered flag to get any previous visibility states. The only tricky thing is the very first one. I guess you can deduce the first one from the observer changes plus the current state of the page, but we could also just surface the first one. I'm not sure which is nicer. But in any case, that entry would solve the completeness for the visibility history of the page. So the proposed attribute names would be something like what I have on the slide. So the ones in red are always required for performance entries, so might as well use them. So name could have just the actual visibility state that the entry is referring to, like what was the state at the time when this entry was dispatched. And then entry type could be something like visibility state, so that it's consistent with the other APIs that we have for visibility state. And then start time could be the time at which this change occurred, which if we do surface an initial entry, it would be 0 or something like that, because it's basically during navigation start. And then duration, I was proposing it could be 0, although Philip Walton from Chrome DevRel commented that maybe it could contain some useful information like duration of visibility change handlers or something like that. I don't know if that's useful or confusing, but I don't know what others think about if it's confusing for duration to be 0, or if there's something useful we could set it to.
I personally feel like information like the duration of visibility change handlers or something could be useful, but I think it would be confusing to have that be the duration attribute itself. Like if we had another attribute that was like processing start or end or whatever we call it, that would be fine. Duration 0 seems reasonable. I mean, there's a lot of other things like marks have a duration 0 because it's the point in time that that thing changed or that mark was fired. So it seems reasonable.
Cool. Anyone else have thoughts?
So for the first event, would it make sense? I mean, the first one that I believe by this design is kind of skipped, right? Would it make sense to insert it artificially to the history?
Right. So we would. There's two options here. It's inserting the first one artificially, so that you know the initial state of the page, or letting the developer deduce it from the actual changes plus the current visibility state. Because of course, once you have those, then you can deduce the very first one. I don't know how do people feel about those two options.
So how would, like, if, for example, I have a page that loaded and never moved to the background or never moved to the foreground, like never had a visibility change, if we don't artificially insert the, initial state, we won't know which is which, right?
Well, you can query the current visibility state already, right? So
sure. So at the point where you're collecting the entries, you're querying the current state and then backtracing where you started.
Yeah, so it feels kind of sketchy to have to do that.
Yeah, I agree, because that it means you have to maintain two different mechanisms: the legacy visibility API and the new one, and also always maintain both. And there's an opportunity here for having a single API to cover all the options.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other thoughts?
I agree. I feel like it would be more the ease of use if we always emitted the first state at time 0. I think that would be more explicit. And then somebody could just look at that log for the complete log of what happened. It feels good.
Okay.
Should it have any other indicator that it's the first one, or just always insert the first one?
So the indicator, I guess, would be that the start time would be set to 0. It wouldn't really be possible for others to have that.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. So There was one comment. I think it's from someone that's not really on the call, though, about page visibility is not technically performance, so why are we linking it to Performance Observer? My reasoning is we want exactly the kind of buffering that Performance Observer already provides. So it's much more convenient to do it this way. And in addition, it helps tie the performance data such as paint timing to the visibility states. So like another option would be to define a page visibility observer that is separate from performance observer and re-implement everything there. That feels a little overkill for me, but I don't know if anyone has strong objections to using performance observer.
I think it actually makes sense to use performance observer because, at least for me, visibility is strongly correlated to performance because of background throttling of CPU and other things that impact performance.
Makes sense.
Yeah, same here. I don't think it makes it's just busy work, and it will be confusing for everyone to have a separate API that does exactly the same as Performance Observer. Like there is no sense in doing that.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I run it through the group since it was someone raised that. And now for my favorite part in every API design, the name of the new interface. I mean, it could be something like visibility state change, but then the first one is not really a change. So it could just be visibility state or visibility state entry. Anyone that's actually good with names wants to chime in, maybe? Give a good idea.
So is your current thought just performance visibility state as the entry type? Is that what you're saying?
Right, and it could even be without performance. There is precedent in layout shift. So, I mean, not saying it's great to have. I mean, because layout shift is not really about performance either, right? So, and similarly, visibility state could just drop the performance. But if you think it's better with performance, we can also put it. I don't have strong opinions.
Visibility state entry.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that we have today that actually has entry at the end is the base class performance entry, right? All the other, like it's performance resource timing, performance navigation timing, right?
Right.
I think. I mean, as long as it's discoverable, that's one of the ways that we use to, feature detect. The name doesn't matter too much, honestly, as long as it's something unique-ish that can be detectable that nobody else is using.
Right. Is there anyone from another browser vendor? Maybe they have opinions on the name.
Benjamin?
Yeah, I think just keep consistency with visibility state, document visibility state. That's totally acceptable.
All right. Actually,
I have a question. This is Michelle from Pinterest. If you passed the buffered flag, does that just give you the previous state, or is it an entire history since the page started loading?
So it will give you the entire history. since the page started loading, although the caveat is that, as usual with the buffered flag, it will only buffer until it becomes full. So technically, if the user is just playing back and forth with the page and does it very quickly, you would not get all entries. But like generally, we make the buffers lenient enough that you should just assume that you have all the history up to that point when you register your observer, assuming it's reasonable timing.
So it is possible that the first entries get dropped in the buffer if it gets full?
No, because the idea is to provide as much history from the beginning of the page load as possible. How the buffer works is that once it gets full, it does not receive any more updates, but the initial entries are not removed. So you always get the initial entries.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I think we would be interested in seeing the first time someone toggles visibility. It's kind of like a form of early abandonment.
Right.
So that would be useful, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so to do that, I guess you would just look at the second entry, because the first one will be the initial state, and the second one will be at the actual first toggle, according to
Right. Gotcha.
Nicholas, did you have a proposal or thoughts around what size of the buffer we would initially propose for something like visibility state? And or is there a way to detect when the initial buffer was full when you're getting the buffered entries? Just so you know you missed history if you did.
Yeah, so for that, I didn't gather data yet on how much visibility state changes we see in a page.
Right, right. But some reasonable number, 20, 30, 50, something like that, entries.
Yeah, I feel like for this one in particular, we can make the buffer slightly smaller than usual. So we perhaps shouldn't worry too much about it. But if you think it's better to gather some data before setting the buffer size, then I can certainly do that. And sorry, you had another question, right?
Oh, just I don't think in a performance observer interface right now, when you call the buffered flag, I don't think you can know whether the buffer was reached. So you don't know if you did hit the limit, other than happening to know that particular user agent's buffer limit and seeing it's that count.
Right. So one thing is
definitely an edge case, but I don't know if that would be useful for other things.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Perhaps that's something we could add to the observer callback, some flag where it says that some buffer was reached. Because yeah, right now it's a little hard for you to really know, because you could get the number of entries equal to the buffer size, but even that doesn't technically guarantee that the buffer is full. Well, actually,
you don't necessarily know the buffer size, though, because it's not something that the user agent exports, and it could change by user agent as well.
Well, technically, it's specified.
Oh, is it? Okay. Okay. Taking like resource timing, for example, we've tweaked it over time, and the actual value isn't available from script. So.
Right, and yeah, it's probably the case that the buffer size, the default buffer size, especially resource timing, is not the same for various implementations. So, yeah.
That's kind of a digression. I can certainly just open up a performance observer case to chat about that more, I guess.
Yeah, open on GitHub. That would be great.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? That was my update. So my next steps will be to, I guess, send PRs to page visibility, because that should be probably where we specify that Oh, and I did notice the page visibility already defines visibility state as an enum. I don't know if we can define an interface with the same name. You have to, you know.
I'm not sure if it's already a defined thing. We probably don't want to like defining a different thing. Like even if IDL allows us to do that, we probably shouldn't.
So maybe visibility state change, although the first one is not a change. I don't know. Or it could be just entry, and yeah. But it's not. Yeah, it's not really consistent with other entries, but we need some appendix, or I mean, can be a prefix too, but sorry, I meant suffix. Yeah, okay.
So Nicholas, I just wanted to add one more thing. I think we already covered it, but maybe for just notes. Regarding whether or not to add initial page visibility state to the entry, it makes sense for convenience that it would be there. And I think we settled on that, which is good. But another reason perhaps to have it is if the first entry was the first change, you would have to sort of infer the first state by taking the opposite. And as long as page visibility only has 2 states, that's possible. And looking at the current status, there are only 2 states. But I was thinking if hypothetically there couldn't be more, and it looks like in the past there was another one pre-render that was removed. But given that there used to be more, I could foresee potentially there being more in the future. So we shouldn't assume we could know past states by just looking at the first change. So that's another reason to make sure to include the first state in the entry.
Yeah, okay.
One thing from an administrative point of view, I think page visibility is more or less, if I remember correctly, on the verge of shipping as L2. So this will probably be a next level thing, but let me just open up the spec and verify. But yeah, it's in PR. So yes, this will be in L3.
So we need to move it from PR to what? Sorry,
no, so I don't think we need to move. There are some things to wrap up with page visibility. Basically, there is one meaningful issue that is not just to remove a single test that I should be doing and haven't gone to it yet. One meaningful issue, which I think requires some HTML integration, and then we can, call page visibility done and move on to L3. I don't think we should block this work on L2 shipping, but it should be on a separate, we should move it to a separate branch and do that work on a separate branch, and then, so that it won't block page visibility. It seems like a brand new, it seems like a new thing that extends page visibility, and it makes sense for that to be a next level thing. Does that make sense to everyone, or Philippe, or are you cool with that?
you're muted.
I should learn the sign language. Yes, I'm cool with it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'll create a, actually I don't know how to, I guess I have to create a new branch for.
Yeah. Yeah, so create an L3 branch, or maybe we can move L2 because it's almost done. We can move L2 to its own branch and then continue to work on L3 on the on main.
Yeah, the only thing is we need to remember to merge all of the L2 changes that occur to that branch as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of tedious, but I can try to make the L3 changes as encapsulated as possible so that merging will be easy.
Yeah, and we can also, we can talk offline, but maybe it's worthwhile to invest some concentrated effort in getting the single issue out the door, and then not deal with multiple branches and merges.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the heads up. Yeah, I think that's it for me. So I'll just stop presenting.
Thank you for sharing all that. Appreciate it, Nicholas. The next topics that we have kind of focus on getting ready for TPAC this fall. I guess the dates are in October, I think 26th. The week is the official date. It's going to be a virtual conference this year, and there's some work that we were thinking about doing ahead of time, figuring out what people's availability might be for virtually meeting at some not very horrible, but somewhat probably inconvenient times for everybody. Hopefully not too much for the people on this call. And some other things that we wanted to kind of work on ahead of time. Yov, I noticed that you had created a form too in the meeting minutes. Did you want to kind of lead that?
Yes. So basically, we discussed a couple of like one thing we need to decide is on what week we actually want the TPAC for this working group to happen. Because yes, there's the official date for October 26th. That is essentially this week is replacing Wednesday on physical TPAC. So it's a functional cross working group day of sessions where we basically people submit proposals for sessions ahead of time, and then everyone can join those sessions according to what's interesting for them. It is typically like an unconference style sessions, and where we can discuss many different things related to web standards. The week for this working group's TPAC meetings should not be that week, because we want people to be available for those cross-functional sessions. So we need to determine on what week we actually want to meet up. And so the form essentially contains 3 questions, So one is on what week we can have this working group's TPAC, and what week works for you. I don't know about you, but my travel schedule has cleared up this year. So it's easier to schedule things than it previously was, but still people may have previous engagements. So I want to gather that information and find a week that is convenient for most people, or as many people as possible. And then we were talking about maybe having hackathon days before TPAC. So this is something we did at a few of our previous face-to-face meetings. So attached a hackathon day to them. Since this year we won't have a physical gathering, we were thinking maybe we can have a few online sessions of half days just working through issues and trying to reduce the number of open issues. There are multiple specs with a few lingering bits and pieces that need to be nailed down. Yeah, it would be great if folks would join that. And basically the question is, will you participate or not? And then we can figure out, like, among the people that participate, we can figure out an ideal date for that. I think, like, from my perspective, it can be like either like somewhere in August or September. Yeah, we can work through the ideal date for that once we know the group of people that are actually planning to join. Yes, Philippe, you want to say something, or?
No, it all sounds great. I'm impressed by how much you know. Actually, I'm glad to hear how much you know.
Yeah.
By the way, we're going to announce it next week. TPAC is going to be free this year, thanks to our sponsors and the fact that, as you can imagine, our costs have been significantly reduced. We are going to also open next week for chairs where they're going to be able to put their target date for a face-to-face meeting to help them avoid overlapping with other working groups. And also, if we want to have any joint meeting with other working groups, to also help that organization as well.
Yeah. Makes sense. Cool. Yeah. So I think the first, or in parallel to that, we can just gather potential weeks. Maybe we'll have multiple of them, and then we can coordinate to minimize conflicts. Yeah, and then the final question is, what time zone are you based at? Because we will try to make it the least awkward time possible, but it's, the world is round, unfortunately. So yeah, it will be early morning for some people and evening for others. Hopefully not worse than that. Yeah, so that's it about the form. I'd highly appreciate if y'all could fill in the bits and pieces that work for you. I will also send it to the mailing list to get more participation. And then when it comes to the meetings themselves, so we were thinking of a format of maybe 4 meetings of 3 hours each with a break in between, because virtual meetings are harder to, like, we can't do full days because of time zones and because people will fall asleep halfway through. So does that make sense? Does the format of 4 meetings in a single week scare you, or is, like, any strong objections to that format?
And Yo, were you thinking that we would concentrate those on 2 days or over 4 days, or?
Over 4 days.
Okay.
So yeah, 4 days of 3 hours.
3 hours.
And I'm assuming you're also allowing a break within those 3 hours.
Yes, yeah. So a break in between, like, an hour and a half mark, probably.
I definitely think 1 a day is preferred.
Yeah. Cool.
And I imagine that ahead of time, we'll do some prep work to try to pick particular topics for each day so that people that want to join or not join for certain things would have the opportunity to ahead of time. So.
Yeah. We will definitely have an agenda ahead of time, and people will be able to join the bits that they're interested in, and ignore others.
Yes, because remember, one of the aspects of TPAC is to allow others to be able to observe meetings as well. So, giving them times and with a clear agenda is going to be even more important this year.
Yeah. Yeah, and also on that front, I'm planning, as always, to also record the TPAC calls and then publish them for people to watch later if they're interested. Yeah, and that's more or less what I had on that front. Yeah, but maybe if this is all the agenda that we had for today, Noam, when he joined, had a few questions that may be interesting to ask the group, or I don't know. Or
short news before we move on to another topic.
Okay.
We started the ACA review of process 2020 and the patent policy 2020 today. So that triggers a 6-week review period for the advisory committee to provide comments on those documents. If everything goes on track, those documents would become effective as early as September 15, which means that we've been putting our rechartering on hold to wait for this process to become effective, but this is actually on the way.
That's awesome. Yeah, and in that case, like ideally, we'd be able to rely on that during the TPAC. Like ideally, we'd want to have the process approved so that we can actually draft the charter during the TPAC, or discuss what it should contain.
Yes. Well, I mean, we can discuss. I mean, the draft of the process is available. It will become effective, so we will be automatically switched to that process on September 15. We are not going to be switched automatically to the patent policy piece, or ever. So if we wanted to adopt the new patent policy, we can either be part of the batch, or we can actually do expedite our rechartering by linking to this new patent policy sooner.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In any case, the current charter takes us till the end of the year.
Correct. Yes.
We will need to renew before that, but yeah. So I think we can safely say that one of the sessions during TPAC will be, let's talk about the new charter and what it should and shouldn't contain.
Okay.
Cool.
So do you want me to, would it make sense to discuss 2 small questions now?
Yeah, I think we have time, so we can do that.
Okay, so the first thing I wanted to ask was about error reporting API to support browser crashes information. Nick says that they already receive through network error logging. I don't know what other people experiences with that.
And sorry, one clarification. I don't think it's actually part of network error logging. I think it's just part of the reporting API.
Yeah, that's
stack.
my understanding as well.
Yep. But regardless, it does work today as long as you register for your report to header URL for the reporting API. You do get crash reports today.
Right.
In Chrome.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'll look at it, and it says it just reports crashes. Does the spec define a more complex structure around the crash, or it's only crash? Like
I believe it's basically just crash. There is some discussion in the reporting API repository, and that possibly has actually been recently split out into like a separate crash observable API. I can't remember exactly the details. And there has been some discussions around other potential data that could be included in the crash report, but it's highly privacy sensitive. So I think there's a lot of, not a lot of information that is proposed to be included. I can try to share the latest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it would be useful to understand if it was like a process crash related to some memory access violation, or out of memory crash, or GPU related crash. I mean, we've seen some of those in our app, but we have no way of tracking it remotely.
So I think that out of memory crashes are split apart. So if I remember correctly, otherwise it may make sense to expose that or not. It, like Nick said, this has like crashes generally are a source of privacy and security issues. So I don't know how much browsers would want to report them to arbitrary sites.
Yeah, arbitrary, I'm sure, but if it's passed through security headers, security policy headers, it means it's more explicit. So
sure, but it still means that we will be sending, like, yeah, so it varies. In some cases, crashes can, if it's a process crash, it can reveal across, if the browser process has, if the browser process has crashed, you won't get a report. So that's easy. But if it's a renderer crash, some renderers can contain cross-origin information in some architectures. So even if the site said it's okay, no, don't worry, give me that information, it may not be the site's information to share, that we can share. So, but at the same time, maybe if you just need general direction of where the crash came from, so out of memory or like GPU issue or things along those lines, maybe that is fine. Yeah.
I think today the only available reason is out of memory. That's the only one that comes out of the box, if you will.
Yeah, well, out of memory is useful as well. We have scenarios like that as well. Okay, it's just interesting to see what people think about that. Yeah, the second thing was around element timing API, performance API. And at the moment, the spec guideline is to use, it supports image element timing and SVG element timing and some text on some certain cases. And my proposal, I guess, or question is to add support for Canvas element as well. And you have correctly indicated that, well, what would that mean, Canvas element timing, right? Is every time we draw something on the canvas, we would like an element timing, or would it be only once or something like that? The way I was thinking about it initially was mainly the first time a canvas is painted, we should have some performance element timing entry. And that is because I believe there are scenarios that most of the drawing or the most of the expensive drawing is done off screen, or at least when the canvas is hidden or not even added to the DOM. And it would be really useful metric to actually measure when was the canvas visible to the user after it has been added or made visible. Does that make sense, or do people think it can be useful? No?
Makes sense. So one question is, if the canvas is built off screen, wouldn't you know when you place it, like when it becomes on screen, or like wouldn't you be able to do that?
Well, you can always add an onload event handler for it, right? Or you could maybe register a request animation frame and track the time on the next paint frame. But that's not as accurate, right? Because you could have done it for image as well. And we already know that's not as reliable and robust as the performance element timing APIs. And there's a reason they were added, I guess,
Right.
because of the also simplicity and accuracy of the measurements. So it's I believe it's for the same reason. It can be useful to have it for Canvas as well.
Okay. Yeah. I think, could you file an issue in the element timing GitHub?
Yeah, I can do that. If there's some feedback, I can add it to the issue if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so basically what we discussed before in terms of like, is this only applicable to drawing an image, or is it like if you have a script that is painting to the canvas? I'm actually not sure. Are those paints being done asynchronously, or are they synchronous?
Well, the most of the Canvas interface is synchronous. So you just after you complete drawing on the canvas, what happens? It's all translated to, at least in Chrome, to GPU instructions, and then it's get offloaded to the GPU render and so on. But at some point, it gets presented to the user after the paint occurs, right? And I don't have any exact information when it's been presented to the user. I just know when I completed drawing and I know when the next frame started.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for something more granular.
Okay, yeah. So the instructions are synchronous, but they then delegate a bulk of the work to the GPU thread or whatnot. And yeah, makes sense. It would be good to see if there's because I would imagine that like every time anything is drawn to canvas, that would be extremely noisy.
Right,
but
I agree.
If you're just interested in the first paint, that may be simpler, I guess.
Yeah. So not for every operation, it's definitely not a good idea. It would also gonna be a performance bottleneck. But once a script completes drawing to the canvas and the canvas is being painted, that what the exact timing measurement for that would be valuable, in my opinion.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Well, I'll just file an issue, and maybe there is going to be a discussion on that issue.
Thanks.
Makes sense. Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Noam. Are there any other topics we want to cover for today? We have a couple minutes left, otherwise we can end early.
Oh, I don't know if you saw my email. I guess I wanted to clarify that for abandonment, the last call I suggested that origin policy is on the way. Turns out it's not on the way. So I guess one question for folks in the call would be, does anyone have thoughts or ideas on the path forward if we wanted to move on with an abandonment / abort / good name coming API? Because As far as I understood, no one currently owns origin policy, and there are some important design questions to be resolved. So as far as I see it, the options are A, use something like NEL, which is also network reporting, but defines caching as the browser will do the caching somehow. So pretty hand-wavy, right? So yeah, I'm actually not sure how Chrome handles NEL caching, but certainly not specified very well as far as I could tell. So that's one option. The other option is to try to get to the current origin policy implementation and see if, well, not implementation, specification, and see if we can push it to be something that works for our use case at least. But then the problem with that is that any future use cases for the original origin policy would not be able to use the origin policy that we specify, because it will probably have the same issues as the current proposal. So not great options, but I wanted to know if anyone has thoughts on that.
I don't know much about the network error logging caching other than it works today. Is that not specified very well in the spec?
I believe
it's hand wavy.
I believe it just says the user agent will do the caching as it pleases.
Okay.
So not specified. Are there any other issues with the network error logging besides hand wavy caching mechanism, or is that the only?
So generally, a few of Chrome's security folks are not excited about the concept of arbitrary headers enabling origin-wide things. So this is criticism that we got for NEL. It's also criticism that we have for client hints, where there's also like well-defined caching, but still caching that's triggered from a header on a resource. And they consider origin policy to be a more authoritative way to have centralized control for what the origin should and shouldn't be doing. At the same time, that is not like, yeah.
But
no one currently owns origin policy, and it has a bunch of issues. So
yeah, I'm just trying to understand what would be the security issues from caching the header.
It's not a security issue as much as it is the fact that single resource defines origin-wide things is something that they don't consider healthy. So there is no specific security issue. It's just that they would have preferred a central origin thing to determine, things that have implications on the rest of the origin.
Right. I mean, that makes sense, but we need some way to do that, right?
Yes. Yeah, and as long as we don't have origin policy that actually works, it's very hard to, if the alternative is doing nothing, that's not a great alternative. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was my only follow-up to that. I guess the short answer, the conclusion here is that we have no idea yet what how we would propose exposing the abandonment or abort or to that API.
Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, with 1 minute left before everyone have to bail, for the next call, I will be on vacation for the most part of July. So 2 weeks from now, and potentially also, let me, yeah. So 2 weeks from now, I'm on vacation, and then I'm back for on July 30th. I will be back. Is there, or a bit before that, but that's the time for the call after that. One option is to, like, you all can have a call without me, and I will live with that guilt. Or alternatively, we can skip the next call and have a call on July 30th. Thoughts?
I mean, I don't mind having a call without you, but it sounds like you're gonna miss us too much. So I don't know if you can.
Yeah, FOMO.
I agree with Nicholas. Like, I can't live with the thought of on vacation dreading what we're saying in WebPerf. I just feel like it's I can't live with it. I just can't do it.
If we have a call, he'll try to call in from whatever island in the Mediterranean he's on just to make sure he's part of it. I don't have a strong opinion either way. So
yeah, I guess if the agenda is not overly crowded, then Benjamin. Yeah. So if the agenda is not overly crowded, then maybe we can skip one and then have a call on like July 30th.
That seems reasonable. Have a summer recess.
Okay. Settled then. Cool. So thanks all, and we'll see you in 4 weeks.
Ciao, folks.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Right.